I thought I'd share with you some of my favourite tools that I like to use to produce my artwork. I'm going to share with you what I like to use, and this will be different for everybody. So it really depends on the type of artwork that you like to produce, the type of effects you like to get with your tools, and you know what you want your work to look like in the end. So my first one is I like to use these sorts of brushes that have a flat edge at the top, because these brushes allow me to get really sharp edges when I'm painting. I also use a rounded brush, but I use them more for these sorts of lines, and but most of the time I use a broad flat brush when I'm painting. The second tool I like to use is a squeegee. And what I do with this is I load up the edge of the squeegee with paint and I scrape it over the top of the painting. And this gives you, it allows the paint to be sort of quite thin so you can see through it. And it also, this is a mark in here that I did, and this is done with the squeegee as well. You get accidents when you use this. You can't have complete control over how that paint is going to spread across the canvas. And those sort of happy accidents are what I'm always after, what I like to get. You can create really nice big curving shapes with it as well, because you can do big curving swoops with it and get a really broad swipe of paint, which is much broader than you would get with a brush. And it is a sort of it's not as thin as a glaze, but it is not, it sort of spreads the thick paint over quite sort of thinly on the painting. The other tools I like to use are these ones. These are colour shapers, and I've done a previous video on how I use these colour shapers. These give me really nice sharp edges as well. I can come in and bring the paint right up to the edge and create these nice sharp edges. I can lay the paint on quite thickly with these, but I can also scratch back through it as well. So I can put it on thickly and then wipe it away in sort of in lines. And so these are really quite nice for moving the paint around the canvas. The other thing I like to use are pencils. So I alternate, when I'm painting, I alternate between putting paint down, wet media, and using dry media. And when I'm using pencils, I like to use these ones. And they're made by Staedtler, and they're Lumacolor permanent pencils. And they're kind of slightly greasy, so they're waterproof. And once you've put them on, once they're dry, they're kind of there. After you've put them on, you can take them off with a damp cloth if you rub, but they are pretty much there. If I paint over them, they're not going to run. They're not going to affect the colour that I put over the top of them. Lines. They come in a variety of colours. The ones that I've been able to get are white, black, red, yellow and blue, and I use all of them. So these are really good. The other thing I like to use when I'm drawing is oil sticks, and these are these big oil sticks that I get, and with these ones you sort of have to peel off a skin that they've got on the outside, and underneath it's like a big fat oil pastel. And this is how I get these sorts of marks, and they dry, so they become really thick and scrunchy and quite lovely on the give a nice texture to the canvas. There's another one there in red. And these are nice once you put them on, if you get a damp cloth, you can rub into them and you can move them about and create some really nice soft effects with these as well. This is done with an oil stick. I also use oil pastels, and this is a mark here done with an oil pastel. These ones up here are done with an oil pastel. These ones underneath here is with oil pastel. These don't dry. And so what you have to do if you use these is be aware that they're not going to dry. And when you put paint over them, if you scrape back the paint, they will resist the paint and they will come through. So you can use that to your advantage. Or if you do want to paint over them, you can just paint over them with some gloss medium, let that dry, and then you can put acrylic paint over them and they won't move. They won't run or rub or anything like that. So that's how you use. I often get asked the question, how do you paint acrylic over oil? I wouldn't paint acrylic over oil paint, but with these pastels, and you definitely can paint over them as long as you seal them first. So those are the tools that I use, that I like to use, and they're sort of my favourites, my go-to tools. The other thing that you need is you need some tools up here. Different artists can have different physical tools. People will like thick brushes, thin brushes. Some people won't like using pastels. Some people like using watercolour, oil, acrylic. There's a huge range. So I've just shared with you what I like to use. But there is a common element when it comes to the mindset stuff. I believe to confidently create artwork, you have to approach it with an open and experimental mindset. So you have to be willing to be open to making mistakes, open to experiment and explore. And when you have that sort of attitude about it, you're not fixed on what it's going to look like in the end. You're just on a bit of a journey of finding out, of discovery, just finding out what looks good. And if something looks good, well, you're going to keep it there, aren't you? It looks good on your painting. So to really create confident artwork that you love, in my experience, you have to be prepared to explore, to try out new things, to make a mess, and to fail. You have to be prepared to make an ugly, to make a painting that doesn't look good, just to find those little bits that do look good. And those are the little bits that will light you up, that make you excited, and that you can cover the rest of the stuff up. But if you get those little bits that really excite you, that you couldn't have planned, then they're the little gifts that happen along the way. When I'm painting, I like to put myself in that zone where that sort of thing can happen often. So I like to tread the line of having control and no control. And that's what most of those, the squeegee and the colour shapers and the big pastels, I use them and try not to be too controlling with them. I try to let the paint sort of dictate how the effect is going to look. I don't try and, manufacture too much. I just sort of want it to evolve, and I want to see what will happen. To use a common cliche, as a marathon and not a sprint. If you're just wanting to get to finish the painting, you're not going to really explore avenues that you haven't before, how to use things differently, using different colours, turning the painting upside down, doing all these things to change things up a little bit. I believe to really make your work exciting, you've got to get really involved in the process and not be so zoned in on the outcome. The outcome kind of takes care of itself, but if you're really into exploring and finding out what things can do and trying new things and discovering things and losing that control and letting the paint show you, then your art will really excite you, and it'll just be a joy.